They told me not to take the old road through Black Hollow, but I did not listen. That stretch of dirt trail cuts straight through the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, where the fog hangs so thick it feels like you could reach out and grab it. Locals call it the Road of Echoes, because at night, every sound seems to come back wrong. Your footsteps, your breath, even your voice if you dare to speak. They say it does not echo, it answers. I was 24 when I took that road, driving home from a contract job in Kentucky. I was supposed to stick to the main highway, but a storm came out of nowhere, lightning ripping across the ridges, rain slamming so hard my wipers barely worked. My GPS kept recalculating, then froze, until it finally loaded one alternate route. Black Hollow Road, I had never heard of it, but it looked like a shortcut within minutes of turning onto it. I knew I had made a mistake. The pavement disappeared after a few miles, replaced by wet gravel that crunched like bone under the tires. The trees leaned so close together that their branches knitted above me, blocking out the sky completely. When thunder rolled, it felt like the whole forest was groaning. I tried to turn on the radio, but all I got was static, the kind that sounds almost like breathing when you listen too long. Then the headlights caught something on the side of the road, a figure. I hit the brakes so hard my seatbelt snapped against my chest. A woman stood just beyond the ditch, pale as paper, her long hair plastered to her face by the rain. She wore what looked like a wedding dress, torn at the hem, soaked in mud. Her bare feet were black with it. At first she did not move. Then she lifted her head and smiled. I rolled down the window just enough to speak. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Her smile widened, but she did not answer. She just pointed down the road, the way I was already headed. I told myself she must have crashed her car, maybe in shock, and I needed to find help, so I drove on, trying to ignore the way my stomach twisted every time the lightning flashed. But a few minutes later I saw her again, standing by a bend in the road, closer this time. That same soaked white dress clinging to her frame. It was impossible. There was no way she could have gotten ahead of me. My headlights flickered. The radio static grew louder. I drove faster. The rain poured harder, turning the road to slick mud. The GPS glitched again, showing nothing but a spinning circle. When I finally reached what looked like a clearing, I stopped to catch my breath. The engine idled rough, the wipers squeaking back and forth. That is when I saw the house, an old wooden farmhouse sitting crooked on the hill, windows boarded, roof half collapsed. A single light flickered in one of the upper windows, the kind of weak yellow glow you get from an oil lamp. And then I heard it, music, faint, like a lullaby being hummed through the rain. Something about it drew me out of the car. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe fear, or maybe something deeper. The rain hit my jacket in heavy sheets as I walked toward the house, each step sinking into the mud. The front door hung open by one hinge, creaking as it swung in the wind. The smell inside was damp and sour, like wet paper and rust. I pulled my flashlight from my pocket and swept the beam across the room, peeling wallpaper, a collapsed staircase, and in the middle of the floor, a wedding veil, dirt-stained, torn next to it. A photograph lying face up on the ground. It showed a woman standing beside a man in front of that same house, both smiling stiffly like they had just been married. Only the woman's face, her eyes, looked exactly like the one I saw on the road. I felt the air change then. The rain outside stopped all at once. The silence pressed against my ears until I could hear my heart beat. Then from upstairs came a soft dragging sound, like something being pulled across the floor. I called out, "Hello? Do you need help?" No answer, just the sound again, slower this time, heavier. When I stepped onto the first stair, the wood groaned under my weight. Halfway up, I saw movement at the top landing. Bare feet, they were wet, leaving small prints that glistened in the flashlight beam. I froze, then her voice came from the dark. "Do you believe in promises?" The words were quiet, trembling, almost childlike. I swallowed hard. "Who's there?" She stepped into view, the woman from the road, dress torn, dripping rainwater onto the floorboards. Her face looked softer now, almost sad. "My husband promised he would come back for me," she whispered. "He never did." She reached out her hand, and for a moment I thought she wanted help. Then her expression changed. Her mouth stretched too wide, the skin around her eyes cracking, as if her face could not contain the smile. "You came instead." The light from my flashlight flickered and died. The next thing I heard was her footsteps rushing down the stairs toward me. I turned and bolted out of the house, slipping on the wet porch, tumbling into the mud below. When I looked back, she was standing in the doorway, her white dress rippling in a wind that did not touch the trees. Lightning split the sky, and she was gone. I scrambled into my car, slammed the door and hit the gas. Mud sprayed behind me as the tires fought for traction. When I finally reached the highway, the rain stopped again, like someone had flipped a switch. My hands were shaking too hard to drive straight, so I pulled over at a gas station a few miles down. The attendant, an older man with a faded Appalachian state cap, came out to check on me. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said with a half smile. I told him what happened. The road, the house, the woman. His smile faded. "You didn't go down Black Hollow, did you?" I nodded. He just sighed and looked away. "They found her out there in the 40s. Bride was on her way to meet her husband. Car slid off the road in the storm. House she was supposed to meet him at burned down the same night. Folks say she still waits for him on that stretch of road, thinking every driver who stops might be him." I looked back toward the mountains. The clouds had thinned, revealing the faint outline of the ridge where the road cut through. And for a moment I thought I saw her, standing by the tree line, veil trailing behind her, looking right at me. Then a truck passed, and she was gone. Sometimes when it rains, I still hear that same lullaby through the static on my car radio, and I remember her voice, soft, hollow, and endless. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the kind of quiet you get when the wind dies down, but the suffocating, heavy kind that makes your ears ring. I was deep in the Appalachian Mountains with my younger brother, Owen, hiking a trail near an old coal town called Mavis Hollow. Locals said the woods were haunted, cursed even, but we had brushed it off as one of those stories people told to keep kids from wandering too far. That silence, though, felt wrong, like the forest was holding its breath. We had started hiking around noon, and by sunset, we were still miles from the campsite we planned to reach. The GPS signal had dropped off hours ago. I remember Owen laughing and saying, "Dude, these trees look the same. You sure you know where we're going?" I wasn't sure anymore. As darkness crept in, the air grew colder, unnaturally cold for early autumn. A fog began rolling through the hollow, thick and milky, blurring everything beyond a few feet. The smell of damp earth and something metallic filled my nose. That's when we saw the cabin. It appeared out of nowhere, half collapsed and leaning to one side. The windows were boarded up, but faint light flickered from inside, the soft glow of a lantern, or maybe a fire. Owen grinned and said, "Perfect. Maybe someone lives here." I wanted to turn back. Everything about that place screamed wrong, but it was getting too dark to keep walking, and my brother's optimism won out. We approached the cabin slowly. The wooden porch creaked beneath our boots, and when Owen knocked, the door swung open by itself. Inside, it smelled like old smoke and rot. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and dust floated in the air like snowflakes. But in the middle of the room was a lit oil lamp, burning bright, steady, and recent. Someone had been here. "Hello?" I called out, no answer. We stepped inside anyway. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The floorboards groaned as we looked around. There were jars on a shelf filled with cloudy water, or at least I thought it was water, and something pale floating inside each one. I stepped closer. It was hair, human hair, strands of every color and length, coiled and knotted like trophies. Owen muttered, "What the hell is this place?" That's when we heard the sound. It was a slow dragging noise, like someone pulling something heavy across the floorboards above us. We froze. Then faint footsteps. Deliberate pacing right overhead, Owen whispered. "Maybe it's an animal." I shook my head. No animal moved like that. Then came a voice, hoarse, breathy, and broken. "Who's down there?" We both jumped back, staring at the ceiling. The footsteps started again, faster this time, coming toward the stairs. Owen panicked and grabbed my arm. "We gotta go, man." We bolted out the front door into the fog, tripping over roots and branches. I could still hear the footsteps, not on wood anymore, but pounding against the earth behind us. Someone was chasing us. We ran until the sound stopped. My lungs burned, and I could barely see through the mist. That's when I realized Owen wasn't behind me anymore. I spun around, screaming his name. The forest gave no answer. I ran back toward where I last saw him, calling out, begging for him to yell back, anything. That was when I saw the light. A single lantern flickering in the fog, swaying back and forth. "Owen," I shouted, running toward it. But as I got closer, I saw it wasn't him. The figure holding the lantern was tall, thin, its face hidden under a torn hood. The light illuminated its hands, bony, gray, and covered in deep scars, nails black like tar. The thing tilted its head slowly, as if studying me, then it spoke. "He's mine now." I turned and ran harder than I ever had in my life. I didn't stop until I reached the road hours later. Hysterical, screaming for help, a search team went back into those woods at dawn. They found the old cabin, empty, cold, long abandoned. The sheriff said it looked like no one had been there for decades, but they never found my brother. When I returned months later, I do not even know why I did. I found something nailed to a tree near that same trail. A jar inside it, a clump of dark blonde hair. Some say Mavis Hollow is cursed because the miners there disturbed something buried deep in the mountains. Something that still hungers for those who wander too far. And when you hear footsteps in those woods at night, you bet. They told me not to take the old road through Black Hollow, but I did not listen. That stretch of dirt trail cut straight through the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, where the fog hangs so thick it feels like you could reach out and grab it. Locals call it the Road of Echoes because at night, every sound seems to come back wrong. Your footsteps, your breath, even your voice if you dare to speak. They say it does not echo, it answers. I was 24 when I took that road. Driving home from a contract job in Kentucky, I was supposed to stick to the main highway, but a storm came out of nowhere. Lightning ripping across the ridges, rain slamming so hard my wipers barely worked. My GPS kept recalculating, then froze, until it finally loaded one alternate route. Black Hollow Road, I had never heard of it, but it looked like a shortcut. Within minutes of turning onto it, I knew I had made a mistake. The pavement disappeared after a few miles, replaced by wet gravel that crunched like bone under the tires. The trees leaned so close together that their branches knitted above me, blocking out the sky completely. When thunder rolled, it felt like the whole forest was groaning. I tried to turn on the radio, but all I got was static, the kind that sounds almost like breathing when you listen too long. Then the headlights caught something on the side of the road. A figure. I hit the brakes so hard my seatbelt snapped against my chest. A woman stood just beyond the ditch, pale as paper, her long hair plastered to her face by the rain. She wore what looked like a wedding dress, torn at the hem, soaked in mud. Her bare feet were black with it. At first she did not move. Then she lifted her head and smiled. I rolled down the window just enough to speak. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Her smile widened, but she did not answer. She just pointed down the road, the way I was already headed. I told myself she must have crashed her car, maybe in shock, and I needed to find help, so I drove on, trying to ignore the way my stomach twisted every time the lightning flashed. But a few minutes later I saw her again, standing by a bend in the road, closer this time. That same soaked white dress clinging to her frame. It was impossible. There was no way she could have gotten ahead of me. My headlights flickered. The radio static grew louder. I drove faster. The rain poured harder. Turning the road to slick mud, the GPS glitched again, showing nothing but a spinning circle. When I finally reached what looked like a clearing, I stopped to catch my breath. The engine idled rough, the wipers squeaking back and forth. That is when I saw the house. An old wooden farmhouse sitting crooked on the hill, windows boarded, roof half collapsed. A single light flickered in one of the upper windows, the kind of weak yellow glow you get from an oil lamp. And then I heard it, music, faint, like a lullaby being hummed through the rain. Something about it drew me out of the car. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe fear, or maybe something deeper. The rain hit my jacket in heavy sheets as I walked toward the house. Each step sinking into the mud, the front door hung open by one hinge, creaking as it swung in the wind. The smell inside was damp and sour, like wet paper and rust. I pulled my flashlight from my pocket and swept the beam across the room, peeling wallpaper, a collapsed staircase, and in the middle of the floor, a wedding veil, dirt-stained, torn. Next to it, a photograph lying face up on the ground. It showed a woman standing beside a man in front of that same house, both smiling stiffly like they had just been married. Only the woman's face, her eyes, looked exactly like the one I saw on the road. I felt the air change then. The rain outside stopped all at once. The silence pressed against my ears until I could hear my heartbeat. Then, from upstairs came a soft, dragging sound. Like something being pulled across the floor, I called out, "Hello? Do you need help?" No answer, just the sound again, slower this time, heavier. When I stepped onto the first stair, the wood groaned under my weight. Halfway up, I saw movement at the top landing. Bare feet, they were wet, leaving small prints that glistened in the flashlight beam. I froze, then her voice came from the dark. "Do you believe in promises?" The words were quiet, trembling, almost childlike. I swallowed hard. "Who's there?" She stepped into view, the woman from the road, dress torn, dripping rainwater onto the floorboards. Her face looked softer now, almost sad. "My husband promised he would come back for me," she whispered. "He never did." She reached out her hand, and for a moment I thought she wanted help. Then her expression changed. Her mouth stretched too wide, the skin around her eyes cracking as if her face could not contain the smile. "You came instead." The light from my flashlight flickered and died. The next thing I heard was her footsteps rushing down the stairs toward me. I turned and bolted out of the house, slipping on the wet porch, tumbling into the mud below. When I looked back, she was standing in the doorway, her white dress rippling in a wind that did not touch the trees. Lightning split the sky, and she was gone. I scrambled into my car, slammed the door, and hit the gas. Mud sprayed behind me as the tires fought for traction. When I finally reached the highway, the rain stopped again, like someone had flipped a switch. My hands were shaking too hard to drive straight, so I pulled over at a gas station a few miles down. The attendant, an older man with a faded Appalachian state cap, came out to check on me. "You look like you seen a ghost," he said with a half smile. I told him what happened. The road, the house, the woman. His smile faded. "You didn't go down Black Hollow, did you?" I nodded. He just sighed and looked away. They found her out there in the 40s. Bride was on her way to meet her husband. Car slid off the road in the storm. House she was supposed to meet him at burned down the same night. Folks say she still waits for him on that stretch of road, thinking every driver who stops might be him. I looked back toward the mountains. The clouds had thinned, revealing the faint outline of the ridge where the road cut through. And for a moment I thought I saw her, standing by the tree line, veil trailing behind her, looking right at me. Then a truck passed and she was gone. Sometimes when it rains, I still hear that same lullaby through the static on my car radio. And I remember her voice, soft, hollow and endless, asking if I believe in promises. The first time I heard the knocking, I thought it was the wind. But wind does not knock in perfect rhythm. It was October in a small Appalachian town called Stony Ridge. I had just moved there after my mother passed, hoping to find peace in the mountains she loved so much. I rented a small cabin tucked deep in the woods, one of those old hunting lodges left over from the 1950s. It was cheap, quiet and far enough from town that I could finally breathe again. The first night was calm. I unpacked, lit the fireplace, and watched the embers fade as rain started tapping against the windows. The smell of pine and smoke filled the air. Then came the sound. 3 slow knocks on the back door. I froze. The cabin was surrounded by forest for miles. There should not have been anyone out there. I turned off the light and peeked through the curtain. Nothing but darkness. The rain had stopped, and the air felt heavy. Probably a branch, I whispered to myself, forcing a laugh I did not feel, but then it happened again. 3 knocks. Same rhythm, same door. This time, I grabbed my flashlight and walked slowly toward the sound. My heart thudded against my ribs. The door handle rattled once as if someone was testing it. When I yanked it open, the porch was empty. Only the soft hiss of wind through the trees. That should have been the end of it. But the knocking came back the next night. Always the same pattern. Always at the same hour. I started keeping the lights on. Sleeping with the TV running, I called the local sheriff. But when he came to check, there were no footprints, no signs of trespassers, not even animal tracks. Could just be the wood settling, he said. Except wood doesn't knock in 3s. Days turned into a week. I was running on almost no sleep, my nerves fraying. The isolation that had once felt peaceful now felt suffocating. Then one night I heard something new. A whisper through the wall between the knocks. I could not make out the words, but it sounded like someone humming low, almost childlike. I pressed my ear to the wall. The humming stopped. Then the voice whispered clearly, right behind the wood. "Let me in!" I jumped back and screamed. Every instinct told me to run, to leave that cabin and never look back. But when I reached for the front door, something hit it from the other side so hard it nearly broke off the hinges. The lights flickered and the air turned freezing. I heard footsteps now, slow and dragging, circling the cabin. My flashlight flickered on its own, and for a split second I saw it. A pale face pressed against the window, eyes like hollow pits, mouth stretched into something that looked more like a tear than a smile. When I turned the lights back on, it was gone. I called the sheriff again the next morning, trembling. He drove up the mountain, calm as ever, and walked around the cabin. When he came back in, he looked pale. You sure you didn't have visitors last night? I told him no. He pointed to the back door. There, clear in the soft dirt, were footprints, bare feet, small ones, like a child's, but each print was burned around the edges, as if the ground had been scorched. He told me it was probably someone messing around. Maybe teenagers, maybe a prank. He left, promising to check in the next day. But he never came back. That night, the knocks started earlier. Not at midnight, but just after sunset. The whisper came again, longer this time. You left the window open. My stomach dropped. I turned to the living room window and saw the curtains fluttering inward. The glass was cracked open, just enough for something small to slip through. Then the humming started again. From inside the cabin I ran for the door, but it slammed shut before I reached it. The lamps went out, and I heard tiny footsteps moving across the wooden floor. My flashlight flicked to life on its own, casting a weak beam across the room. In the corner, crouched behind my old rocking chair, was a figure, small, pale, drenched in mud. It looked like a little girl, but her eyes were all wrong, black and glassy like a doll's, and her mouth moved without sound. I whispered, "Who are you?" She tilted her head, bones cracking with the motion. Then finally I heard her voice, faint, echoing, layered with something older behind it. "You moved into my house before I could react." She lunged toward me. Her hands were ice cold when they gripped my throat. My vision blurred and I fell back, hitting the floor hard. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was the sound of the knocking again. 3 times, slow and steady, I woke up outside at dawn, lying in the mud behind the cabin. My door was wide open, the window shattered, and all the lights burned out. The sheriff's car was still parked by the trailhead, but he was gone. They searched for him for days, found nothing. I moved out that same morning, drove until the mountains disappeared behind me. But no matter where I go, I still hear it sometimes. 3 soft knocks. Same rhythm, same whisper behind them. Let me in. And every time I hear it, I remember the burned footprints by that door, and how cold those little hands felt when they wrapped around my throat. Because some things in these mountains are not ghosts. They are older, and they never forget who steps into their home. There are screams in the Appalachian fog that do not sound human. I learned that the hard way. I was a wildlife photographer, working on a project about the Appalachian Trail's lesser-known stretches, the forgotten paths that no longer appear on maps. It was my first solo trip since my wife passed. She had always told me, "Stay where the trails are marked." I used to laugh at that, but now her voice echoed in my head as I stared at the old wooden sign half buried in vines. It said, "Raven Hollow." Letters almost erased by weather. I should have turned back then, but curiosity is its own curse. I followed the narrow path down a slope wrapped in thick fog. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. Even the birds refused to sing. My boots sank into soft moss, and every step felt like walking through the lungs of the earth. The air smelled like rot and rain. About an hour in, I saw the cabin. It was small and sunken into the hillside. Its roof caved in on one side. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney. Though no one should have been living this far out, I took a few photos from a distance, zoomed in through the mist, and that was when I saw someone in the window, a pale face, staring directly at me. I froze. Then, just as quickly, it vanished. "Hello?" I called, my voice too loud in that suffocating quiet. No answer. I decided to move closer, hoping maybe someone local still used the place. The porch groaned under my weight, and the door creaked open on its own. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint metallic smell of old blood. Furniture was overturned, photographs scattered across the floor, all black and white portraits of the same family, each one scratched through the faces with something sharp. I picked up one of the photos. The people in it looked early 1900s. A mother, father, and two small daughters. Behind them stood that same cabin, perfectly intact. The strange part was their eyes were all wide, not smiling, like they knew something was watching them even then. The sound of footsteps snapped me out of it. I turned, expecting to see someone behind me. No one was there, but the front door, the one I had entered through, was now shut. The fog outside pressed against the windows like it was alive. I tried opening the door again, locked from the outside. Then I heard it. A voice, low and rasping, coming from the corner of the room. "You found us." I spun around. A figure stood half hidden in shadow. At first I thought it was a man, but the longer I stared, the more wrong it looked. The head was tilted too far to one side, the neck impossibly long, the limbs bent in sharp angles. "Who are you?" I whispered. The thing stepped forward, and I saw its face, or what was left of one. Hollow eyes, skin pulled tight like wax over bone, mouth stitched shut with what looked like black thread. It raised one trembling hand and pointed toward the photographs scattered on the floor. I knelt down slowly, my breath shaking, and noticed something I had missed before. In every scratched-out face, faintly visible under the gouges, were tiny black lines running down from their mouths. Like they too had been sewn closed, the creature began to move closer, its joints cracked with every step. When it reached the light spilling from my flashlight, it recoiled violently and let out a sound that was neither a scream nor a growl. Something in between, layered and echoing. I ran. I kicked the door until it splintered open, stumbled into the fog, and sprinted blindly up the hill. The forest seemed to twist around me. No matter how far I went, the cabin's outline kept reappearing through the mist. My compass spun uselessly. My camera strap tangled around my neck as I fell again and again, scraping my hands raw. Then, through the fog, I saw a lantern. Someone was walking toward me. Relief surged through me until I saw what they were carrying. It was my camera. The man, or what looked like one, was tall, wearing an old hat and overalls soaked in black water. His face was hidden, but he held the camera out toward me. When I got closer, I realized it was my exact model, still covered in fresh mud. "I think you dropped this," he said. His voice was wet, like someone speaking underwater. I turned and ran again. My flashlight beam caught something white dangling from a tree, a set of photographs clipped to strings. All the images were of me, standing at the cabin door, looking into the fog, kneeling by the photos on the floor, each shot perfectly framed, taken from outside the cabin. The last photo showed me looking directly into the lens, but I never took that one. That was when I heard the whisper again, close to my ear, "You found us." The next thing I remember is waking up near the base of the trail, my camera shattered beside me. It was morning, and the fog had cleared. My memory felt broken, pieces missing, moments gone. When I drove back to town and developed the last few photos from my memory card, there was only one image that had not corrupted. It was the photo of the family from the cabin. Except now, there was a fifth figure standing behind them, me. They say Raven Hollow does not exist on any map anymore because the earth swallowed it whole after the mining collapse a century ago. But sometimes, when the fog rolls low and the woods go silent, people hear a camera shutter echo through the valley, followed by a It started with a storm that swallowed the sky. I'd been driving through the back roads of West Virginia, following GPS directions that made less and less sense the deeper I went. I was heading to interview an old hermit named Ellis, a man rumored to know every ghost story from Boone County to the Tennessee border. My podcast was just starting to gain traction back then, and I was desperate for something authentic, something real. By the time I reached the mountain pass, the rain was hammering the windshield so hard I could barely see. The GPS lost signal, the radio cut to static, and lightning kept flaring over the peaks like veins of fire. I pulled over near a wooden sign half-eaten by moss. The only word still visible was Devil's Rest. The name should have been warning enough. I drove another half-mile before the road vanished under a rock slide, with no way forward and no signal. I grabbed my flashlight and decided to walk the last stretch. The woods were soaked, the mud deep and black every few minutes. Thunder cracked close enough to shake the ground. After an hour, I saw a faint glow through the trees. A small cabin stood in the clearing. Its single window flickering with lamplight, I shouted, "Mr. Ellis?" No answer. When I stepped onto the porch, I saw the door already ajar inside. The cabin looked abandoned, dust thick on the floorboards, jars of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, and symbols carved into the wooden beams. My flashlight beam caught a row of animal skulls lined on the mantel, each one with tiny holes drilled into the forehead. Something about that cabin felt wrong. The silence wasn't natural. It was heavy, like the air itself was listening. Then a low moan came from behind the back wall. "Mr. Ellis?" I called again. My voice trembled. The moan turned into words, strained and wet like a throat full of gravel. "Leave." Before it wakes, my stomach dropped. I backed toward the door, and that was when the lamp flared brighter on its own. A shadow moved across the far wall. It wasn't mine. It was too tall, its head brushing the ceiling. The boards above me groaned. Dust falling from the rafters. Something was up there. Crawling slow, deliberate, heavy, I swung the flashlight upward just as a hand, blackened and clawed, slid down from the beams. I ran outside, slipping in the mud. Barely able to see through the downpour, I sprinted toward the tree line. But a voice bellowed behind me, not human, but deep. Like the earth itself was speaking. "Stay." My knees buckled from the vibration. I turned just long enough to see it drop from the roof. It was not a man, not anymore. Its body was twisted, its bones jutting through skin that glistened like tar. The head was human-shaped but stretched, jaw unhinged too far, eyes glowing with dull orange light. It crawled forward on all fours, sniffing the air. Lightning flashed, and for a second I saw its back, carved with hundreds of names. My flashlight beam landed on one near the shoulder. Ellis. I ran until my lungs burned, the woods bent in directions that made no sense. The path looping back toward the same clearing again and again, every time I thought I had escaped. I'd hear that word echo through the thunder. Stay. Finally, I found an old mine entrance half hidden by weeds and rock. Desperate, I ducked inside for shelter. The air was thick with iron and rot. I sat against the wall, breathing hard. My flashlight flickering. That was when I saw the drawings. Hundreds of them, carved into the stone. Circles, symbols, names, and in the center a crude figure, tall, hollow-eyed, with a crown of horns underneath it, scrawled in shaky letters. It eats names. The scratching of claws echoed down the tunnel. I held my breath as the sound crept closer. Slow and steady, my flashlight died completely, plunging me into total black. I fumbled for my lighter, my hand shaking, and when I finally sparked it, it was standing inches from me. Its face leaned close enough for me to smell decay on its breath. Then it whispered in a voice that wasn't entirely real, vibrating through my bones, "Say your name." I clenched my jaw, refused to speak. It tilted its head, waiting. When I stayed silent, it reached out and pressed one clawed finger against my chest. The pain burned through my skin, searing deep. I could smell smoke. When I woke, I was lying just outside the mine. The storm had passed, the forest unnaturally quiet. My shirt was torn open, and across my chest, burned into my skin, was one word: Ellis. I stumbled back toward my car, but when I got there, the dashboard clock read Forengday, around 2 days later than when I had arrived. My phone had 50 missed calls, all from my producer. The strangest part, the sheriff said there was no record of anyone named Ellis living in that county for at least 40 years, but when they checked old census files, there was one name on the property deed for the cabin in Devil's Rest Hollow: Ellis Carter, died 1983. Cause of death listed as unknown injuries consistent with severe burning. I deleted the recordings from that trip. But sometimes when I edit audio late at night, I still hear that word through the background static. Stay. And every so often, when I look in the mirror, I can still see faint outlines of that burned name on my chest. It never healed right, because the thing in those mountains doesn't hunt for food. It hunts for identity, carving its They said the hollow was cursed long before my family settled there. It was called Red Hollow, though no map ever marked it. Locals said the name came from the soil, deep red like rust, but others whispered it came from something older, something buried beneath that ground. I was 12 when we moved there. My father bought a rundown farmhouse tucked between two ridges, saying it would be our fresh start. After Mama died, he wanted quiet, space, and distance from the world. The mountains offered all three, but they also offered something else. Our first night there, I woke to the sound of knocking. Slow measured 3 knocks, then silence. I thought it was the wind or the shutters, but when I checked, the sound was coming from inside the walls. The next morning, I told my father. He barely looked up from his coffee. "Old houses make old noises," he said, but by the 3rd night he heard it too. Knock, 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 always 3 times, always from somewhere new. After a week, we started finding strange things around the property. Small piles of stones on the porch, feathers tied together with string, and once, a jar filled with dark water and something floating inside that looked like a human tooth. Dad buried the jar and told me not to talk about it, but the silence in that house was growing heavier, like the walls were holding their breath. Then came the night I saw her. The moon was full, shining through my window. I woke to movement at the edge of my bed. A figure hunched low, hair matted and wet. Face hidden, I froze, clutching my blanket. When the figure lifted its head, I saw her eyes. They were pale, milky, and full of water. She whispered something I could barely understand. It sounded like, "You should not be here." Then she crawled backward toward the window and vanished into the dark. When I told Dad, he went pale. He grabbed a shotgun and told me to stay inside. I watched from the window as he went out to the barn with a lantern. He did not come back for 2 hours. When he did, he locked every door and window and sat at the table staring at nothing. I asked what he saw. His voice cracked when he said, "Your mother." That made no sense. Mama had died in a car crash hundreds of miles away. But Dad was shaking so hard I did not argue. The next morning, I saw footprints in the mud leading from the barn to the woods. Barefoot, small, like a woman's. The trail went down into the ravine where the creek ran red after rain. The locals started avoiding us when Dad drove into town for supplies. People turned away. One old man, the store owner, finally told him, "You bought the Carter place. You should have burned it when Dad pressed." The man said the last family that lived there, the Carters, vanished one by one every time a new moon came. One member disappeared. No bodies were ever found. Just those stone piles on their porch. Dad didn't believe in curses, but when the knocking came again that night, louder than before, something in him broke. He went into the cellar with a shovel and started digging. He said he needed to find where it started. Hours passed. I sat at the top of the stairs, listening to the scraping of the shovel echo through the dirt. Then the sound stopped. "Dad?" I called. No answer. I climbed down halfway, the lantern trembling in my hand. The hole he had dug was deep. Almost 6 feet. I leaned closer and saw something inside. It was a wooden box, old, rotting. Dad was standing knee-deep in the pit, prying it open. When the lid broke loose, a smell hit me like spoiled meat. Inside were bones, small ones, and a faded white dress. Dad stumbled back, his face white. "They buried her here," he whispered. "They buried her in the house." That was when the knocking started again. This time, from all around us, the beams shook. Dust rained from the ceiling and the air grew freezing cold. Then, a voice came through the dark, low, wet, gurgling. "You should not be here." The lantern burst. Plunging us into black, I heard Dad scream, short, sharp, and cut off mid-breath. I felt something brush against my face. Fingers icy cold, I ran up the stairs, slammed the door, and held it shut until dawn. When I opened it, the cellar was empty. No hole, no box, no Dad. Just mud and water covering the floor. Sheriff's men searched for 3 days. They said he must have fallen into the creek. But I knew the truth. The ground had taken him. I was sent to live with an aunt in Kentucky. I tried to forget Red Hollow, tried to forget that voice. But years later I went back. The house was gone, burned to the ground. Only the cellar remained, covered by a wooden hatch nailed shut with iron spikes. I should have left it that way, but curiosity is a cruel thing. I pried it open. Inside, the dirt was undisturbed, and except for one thing, a pile of stones, 3 of them, and on top, a tooth. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye. A reflection in the rusted water pooled at my feet. A woman's face, long hair, milky eyes. She smiled, her lips moving soundlessly. Then the reflection blinked, but I did not now. Every time it rains, I hear it again. Knock, 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 always 3 times, and every time it sounds closer. Because the hollow never forgets. It keeps what it's owed. They told us not to follow the lights. It was the first thing our foreman said when we started working the midnight shift in the abandoned coal tunnels outside Harlan. He looked each of us in the eye and repeated it like a prayer. "If you see a lantern where no man should be, you run, you hear me? You run and never look back." We all laughed at the time. I wish I hadn't. The mines were old, carved into the heart of the mountain back before electricity reached that part of Appalachia. Some tunnels were so deep you could walk for an hour without seeing a single light. The air was thick, heavy, and always smelled faintly of smoke even when there wasn't any fire. There were 6 of us on that shift. Me, my cousin Danny, old Leroy, who'd been mining since the 60s, and 3 new guys from town. The job was simple: inspect old shafts, make sure no one was trespassing, and reinforce any weak supports. It was supposed to be routine. It wasn't. The first night, we heard whistling. It started faint, a soft tune echoing through the tunnels. Leroy froze mid-step. "Don't whistle back," he whispered. "Never whistle back." The sound grew louder, like someone was walking just beyond the glow of our headlamps. But when we swung the lights around, there was nothing there. Just wet rock and old coal dust floating like smoke. Then Danny saw it first, a faint orange light flickering deep down the corridor. "Probably one of the other crews," he said, trying to sound brave. But there were no other crews scheduled that night. The lantern swayed slowly, moving side to side like someone carrying it. It disappeared around a bend, and before I could stop him, Danny called out, "Hey! You're not supposed to be down there." Leroy grabbed him hard. "Don't speak to it." His voice shook. "If you answer, it knows your voice." We stood frozen as the light reappeared, closer this time. Then the whistling came again, louder now, echoing like it was coming from every direction. That was when the new guy, I think his name was Paul, panicked and ran toward it. We shouted for him to stop, but he didn't listen. The lantern light flared bright like a sudden fire, and his scream cut through the tunnels. Short, sharp, then gone. We found him hours later, sitting in the dark, his lamp broken, his eyes wide and glassy. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't blink, just kept muttering, "He's still down there. He knows my name." They sent him to the hospital in Lexington. We never saw him again. The next night, the foreman wanted to shut the whole mine down, but the company pushed back, said superstition didn't stop progress. They sent us back in. The deeper we went, the stranger things became. The air was colder. Our breath fogged the lights. We started finding things that shouldn't have been there. Old boots still laced, picks stuck up right in the dirt, helmets crushed flat like they'd been stepped on. Then, halfway down Shaft 19, we found a tunnel that wasn't on any of the maps. The walls were older, carved by hand, Leroy said. "That's the original vein. They sealed it off after the collapse in 1912, Danny asked. "Who's working down there now?" Leroy didn't answer. He just stared at the dark opening and muttered a prayer under his breath. Still, the company wanted proof the tunnel was stable. So we went in. The passage sloped downward, and the deeper we walked, the louder the whistling became. Then the light appeared again. It was just ahead, swinging gently like it was waiting for us. This time I noticed something different. Shadows moving behind it. Shapes that didn't belong to men. Long, thin limbs, heads tilted at impossible angles. The air started to hum. Our lamps flickered. Leroy's voice cracked when he whispered, "He's leading us." "Leading us where?" Danny asked. "To the fire." A second later, the floor gave way beneath us. We tumbled into blackness. Dirt raining down, my lamp shattered, and everything went dark except for that single orange glow. The lantern now resting on the ground just a few feet away. I crawled toward it. The light swayed, though no one held it. Then I saw him, the lantern man. His face was ash gray, skin melted like wax. One eye was gone. The other glowed faint orange like a coal ember. His clothes were torn miner's gear, but his chest still burned. There was a hole where his heart should have been, and inside fire still flickered faintly, keeping him alive. He looked at me and smiled, teeth blackened. Then he whispered in a voice that sounded like wind through gravel, "Take the light, keep it burning." I stumbled back. Choking on smoke, the air was thick and hot now. Though no flame touched me behind him, the walls pulsed like they were alive, breathing smoke and embers. Danny screamed, pulling me to my feet. We ran through the dark, tripping over bones half buried in soot. Every direction looked the same. Every tunnel led back to that light. Then Leroy shouted something, an old hymn, and threw his headlamp into the dark. There was a burst of light, a sound like thunder, and suddenly we were outside, crawling from the mine entrance into cold night air. The mine collapsed behind us, sealing the tunnel forever. We sat in silence until sunrise. No one spoke. When the rescue crew arrived, they found no bodies, no tracks, no sign of the lantern man. But the strange part was this. The collapse had unearthed something buried in the walls. 7 old lanterns, rusted and cracked. Each one filled with ashes. I left the job after that. Danny still wakes up screaming some nights. He says he dreams of that tunnel, of the whistling, and sometimes, when I drive through those hills at night, I see it again. A faint orange light glowing between the trees, swinging side to side. They say he still walks the tunnels looking for new miners to carry his flame. So if you ever find yourself deep in the Appalachian night, and you see a lantern where no one should be, do not follow it. Because once you see the lantern man's They told us the mountains were sleeping gods. That was what my grandmother used to say whenever thunder rolled through the valleys of Kentucky. "That's not a storm," she'd whisper. "That's the mountain turning over," I used to laugh. Until I heard it myself. My family owned an old cabin in Black Hollow, a stretch of Appalachian wilderness miles from the nearest town. My great-grandfather had built it before the war and always said strange things happened there. Things that made no sense. The trees grew twisted in one direction. The animals refused to come near the creek. And sometimes the earth itself seemed to hum like something beneath was breathing. After my grandmother passed, the cabin became mine. I went there to clear it out, planning to sell the land. I should have left the first night. It started with the hum. I woke up around 2 a.m. The walls were vibrating softly, as if a heavy truck was rolling by. But there was no road for miles. I stepped outside, and the night was dead silent. No wind, no bugs, no sound at all. Then faintly I heard it. A low, rhythmic rumble coming from the mountainside, deep and steady like a heartbeat. The next morning, I found the creek had changed overnight. The water had turned reddish-brown and thick as syrup. The air smelled like iron. I followed the stream back through the woods until I reached a spot where the ground had split open. A sinkhole, wide, black, breathing cool air from below. Something in me said not to go near it. But curiosity is dangerous. I tossed a rock in. I expected a splash. Instead, I heard the faint sound of chains. That night the humming returned, louder this time. Things in the cabin rattled on their shelves. I packed my bag, ready to leave at dawn. But when I stepped outside, the ground trembled and a sound rose from the valley. Not thunder, not wind. A voice low, ancient, whispering in a language I could not understand. It came from the sinkhole. I ran back inside and tried to ignore it. I turned up an old radio, but the signal only played static. except every few seconds. Beneath the crackle, I heard breathing. Long, deep, steady. Just before dawn, someone knocked on the door. 3 soft knocks, then silence. I froze. There were no neighbors within miles. I didn't answer. Another 3 knocks then. From the other side of the door, a voice. My grandmother's voice. "Child, let me in. You left something behind." I couldn't breathe. She'd been dead for years. The voice came again. Softer, almost pleading. "It is cold out here. Please." I grabbed the lantern and crept toward the window. Outside, something stood in the clearing. It looked like her. Same gray hair, same shawl. But her feet weren't touching the ground. The earth beneath her shimmered like heat on asphalt. I whispered, "You're not her." The thing smiled. "The mountain remembers." I ran to the back door. But when I opened it, the world outside had changed. The trees were gone, replaced by vast stone walls. The air smelled like dust and metal. I was standing in a cavern. The floor pulsed beneath my boots like flesh. Then I realized I hadn't left the cabin at all. The mountain had swallowed it. From the darkness ahead came shapes, dozens of them. They moved like smoke, but when the lantern light hit them, I saw faces carved from rock, human faces twisted in agony. Their eyes glowed faint orange, the same color as molten earth. They whispered as they passed. Voices overlapping like wind through dead leaves. "He is waking. He is hungry." I stumbled backward, tripping over something hard. A chain bolted into the ground. The links were thick as my arm, running deep into the rock. From below came the rumbling again, louder now, shaking the walls. Then the ground cracked open, and light poured out, red, searing. I saw movement far beneath the surface. Something shifting slowly, massive, ancient. A single hand made of stone, and earth began to rise. The whispers became screams. The faces in the walls opened their mouths wide. Releasing clouds of black smoke, the lantern shattered. I ran through tunnels that seemed to bend and twist. No matter which way I turned, the rumbling followed. A living heartbeat shaking the world. I burst through an opening and found myself outside again, gasping under a blood-red dawn. Behind me, the mountain groaned. The sinkhole had vanished. The creek was running clear once more. It looked like nothing had happened. I drove until the sun was high and didn't stop until I reached town. When I tried to explain what I'd seen, no one believed me. They said the mountain sometimes made noises. Gas shifting underground, nothing more. But that night, when I checked my voicemail, there was a single recording. Static, then faintly. My grandmother's voice again. "He remembers you." I threw the phone away. But the message still plays sometimes. Through my car radio, through the walls of cheap motels. Even in my dreams, last week I went online and searched local news from that area. A new sinkhole had opened near Black Hollow, locals say at night. They hear something breathing deep underground. Some say the mountain isn't sleeping anymore. If you ever go hiking through that stretch of Appalachia, and you hear thunder when there